What's a scary science fact that the public knows nothing about? Story 1. The original nuclear bombs leveled the cities they detonated over, yet are considered puny by today's standards. The most powerful nuclear bomb ever created, the Tsar Bomba, had an explosive yield 3,000 times more powerful than the original nuclear bombs, and its power was calculated to be more than 10 times the combined power of every single munition used in World War II. That includes every bullet fired, every grenade thrown, every artillery shell fired, every bomb dropped, and of course, the 2 nuclear bombs dropped. It was detonated 4 kilometers from the ground over the remote Severny Island, yet still destroyed towns within a couple of 100 kilometers of the blast, and broke windows as far away as Copenhagen, Denmark. The shockwave from the blast circled the globe 9 times. The plane that dropped it was given a 50-50 chance of survival, yet the bomb was originally designed to be twice as powerful. Story 2. Amongst the possible ways the universe can end, one is called the Big Chance. All of them are pretty bleak, but I'm singling this one for a reason. It is common knowledge that everything likes to stay in its lowest energy state. A ball falls or rolls down a slope if left on its own. We can derive all of the known physical laws by mathematically following the assumption that everything is lazy as hell, which we physicists like to term the least action principle to conceal that we are dumb. Anyway, the universe is in no way different. The universe likes to stay in the lowest possible energy state, which we call a vacuum. It is in a local minimum. Think of local minimum as a dip on a curvy tabletop in which a ball is sitting. If you shift the ball slightly, it will slide back to that position. But that local minimum may not be a global minimum, i.e. that dip may not be the deepest dip on the tabletop. The ball will be at a lower energy in the deepest dip. However, it cannot move from the current dip on its own, though it is higher than the deepest one, because there is a higher barrier that it cannot overcome. Or can it? There's something in quantum mechanics called quantum tunneling that allows a ball to phase through the barrier into the deeper hole. Similar is the case with the universe. We don't know if the current vacuum the universe is in is the true vacuum, i.e. the deepest hole, or it is a false vacuum, one of the shallower holes. There's a high probability that the current vacuum is a false vacuum, and it can start to tunnel into the true vacuum. All it would require is one particle, anywhere, to decay the lower energy state. Then it would create a true vacuum bubble that would then proceed to expand and engulf our universe, destroying everything we know as it is, and creating new laws of physics. All it takes is any one of those around 1,084 particles. That's 1 trillion particles present in the universe to decay at any point in time. The bubble expands at the speed of light, so we will never see it coming. The scary part? It may have already happened, and coming toward us. There is absolutely nothing we can do to stop it. Story 3. If your dog swims in a lake after receiving a spot-on flea treatment, it decimates the invertebrate population. A large dog swimming in 8 Olympic swimming pools worth of water soon after treatment will leach enough neurotoxin to kill 50% of the lake's invertebrate population within 48 hours. I say after, I mean relatively soon after, within, say, a day, to have an effect quite this devastating. The leaching does reduce over the month, but it's still there, and the effect of multiple dogs still allows for a terrible buildup of chemicals. Story 4. I only recently learned that when you get sunburned, the burn isn't because of skin cell damage. UV radiation damages the DNA. Then the skin cells decide to commit suicide and fall off so that the damaged DNA doesn't produce cancer. I'll never be mad at my skin peeling again. Story 5. Brain aneurysms can be completely unpredictable and can happen at any time in your life, no matter how healthy you are. A kid who I went to high school with at the age of 16 just did not wake up one morning, and his cause of death was a brain aneurysm. I lost my husband of 12 years, we were best friends for 20 years, to a sudden brain aneurysm. The last words to me were, "Hun, I feel dizzy," and bam, on the floor, dead. I did CPR for 20 minutes waiting for help to come. Doctor said it was instant. It sucked for me because it was so sudden, but I take solace in the fact that he felt no pain. He hated hospitals and never spent a night in one in his 62 years of life. The most ironic thing, and I live in Mexico, is that it was on the Day of the Dead. Hard for me at the time, but man, if I got to have a choice of what day to go, it would be something like that. We had a weird sense of humor. Rip Al. Story 6. There is a gravitational anomaly in space called the Great Attractor, which is pulling everything within the Virgo and Hydra Centaurus superclusters towards it. It lies 150 to 250 million light-years from the Milky Way, which itself is being pulled towards it too. The scary part is that, relative to us, this anomaly lies within the same plane as our own galaxy, making it very difficult to observe. Essentially, we have almost no concrete idea of what it is. On the flip side of the Great Attractor is the Boötes Void, which I find a bit creepy. The Boötes Void, sometimes called the Great Void, is a huge spherical region of space that contains very few galaxies. It's approximately 700 million light-years from Earth and located near the constellation Boötes, which is how it got its name. The supervoid measures 250 million light-years in diameter, representing approximately 0.27% of the diameter of the observable universe, which itself is a daunting 93 billion light-years across, making it the largest known void in the universe. At first, astronomers were only able to find 8 galaxies across the expanse, but further observations revealed a total of 60 galaxies. Now, while that might seem like a lot, it would be like stumbling upon only 60 objects across a region larger than the continental United States. That's just in 2 dimensions. According to astronomer Greg Aldering, the scale of the void is such that, if the Milky Way had been in the center of the Boötes Void, we wouldn't have known there were other galaxies until 1960s. Looking at the volume of the Boötes Void, it should contain about 10,000 galaxies, when considering that the average distance between galaxies elsewhere in the universe is a few million light-years. But the question is, why and how this void came to be? There hasn't been enough time since the universe began for mere gravitational forces to clear out a space of that size. There's a theory that suggests that supervoids are caused by the intermingling of smaller mini-voids, like soap bubbles coming together. But a more, maybe creepier explanation is that the Boötes Void could be the result of an expanding Kardashev 3-scale civilization. As the colonization bubble expands outward from its home system, the civilization dims each star, and subsequently each galaxy it encounters by blanketing it in a Dyson shell. This might also explain why the void has such a nice spherical shape. Oh, and we're seeing a snapshot of the void 700 million years ago. A lot could have happened in 700 million years that we just cannot see or know due to the inherent speed of light. Sweet dreams, everyone. Story 7. The world is literally running out of sand that is used to manufacture concrete. Most of the world's sand is in its deserts, but usable sand only comes from riverbeds, shores, and lake beds. People are being murdered over sand right now. I'm from the Spruce Pine, NC, and I only mention this because you mentioned sand. Our town is known as the home of the highest purity quartz deposits in the world. Apparently, the quartz deposits out here are mined, and the quartz is turned into silica sand, which is then used to manufacture concrete, glass, ceramics, and other things as well. Our quartz deposit is one of around 3 to 4 deposits in the world. The mining of the deposits has had a serious effect in the mountains surrounding the deposits. Just Google the deposits and you will see what I mean. Also, people who work for the Quartz Corp and Feldspar, the owners of the deposits, are pretty much oblivious to the possible health hazards associated with breathing in silica sand all day. My boyfriend worked for Feldspar for around 6 months, after having to quit after he started having breathing issues. The people who own these mineral deposits make an incomprehensible amount of money, yet are still so greedy they refuse to offer their employees proper safety equipment, and also are able to bypass many of the environmental protection laws. They also pay the least in property taxes, yet benefit the most from reaping the property. I know I wrote a lot, but I just thought I'd share so that you guys would have an idea of who the people controlling the sand are. Story 8. We don't fully know how general anesthesia works. My usual technical answer is, it scrambles the brain, but that goes away when we turn the anesthesia off. I knew that general anesthesia caused sleeping issues, but the reason is weird. I attended an animal behavior conference a few years ago that included a lady talking about general anesthetics in bees. The bees had a complex time structure and would normally do certain things in certain times of the day. Those given anesthesia had their body clock shifted by the time that they were under. Like that period didn't exist for them. Their whole body clock was paused. Completely different from if they had been sleeping. Apparently the same is true for humans. Story 9. Antibiotics have been abused and misused for so long that various bacteria strains have started to get resistance to them. What used to be a treatable infection might soon become deadly because we are unable to treat it with the antibiotics we have today. There is research to try and find other ways to treat antibiotic-resistant bacteria. But until then, please use prescribed antibiotics until they are finished, not until you feel better. If unused, do not flush them down the toilet or put them in the bin. Give it to a pharmacy so they can discard them correctly. And use antibiotics when necessary. Some countries give them willy-nilly while others are more conservative. Story 10. It's fairly easy to clone humans. It's really only ethics that's stopping us. We've had the ability to clone since the 1800s. Sea urchins were the first successful clones, and we've successfully cloned sheep, pigs, and rhesus monkeys since then. And I seem to recall the Chinese were working on mixing human DNA with animal DNA. I seem to recall they had some success, but had to destroy the cells because of said ethics. Story 11. Cancer geneticist here. Most cases of cancer that are sequenced generally just denote the prognosis or how long a patient has to live, rather than treatment options. People always say, let's cure cancer. However, this simplifies cancer as though it is only one disease. It's far more complicated than that. I studied at one of the largest cancer hospitals in the world, where the motto is to make cancer history, but the only obtainable goal is to make it chronic. We study and research as much as possible, but every cancer requires different research. And unfortunately, the powers that be often prohibit funding and proficient research. It's work I'm passionate about, but also a broken system that is infuriating to work in. Story 12. In the UK, about 17% of people have fetal alcohol syndrome. McGuire et al. 1992. As much as 17% of us are developmentally disabled simply because, prior to the late 90s, a large proportion of British mothers drank during pregnancy, 41%. Thankfully, the prevalence rate has been falling fast since the late 90s, when all this research was published, but it's terrifying to see how much of an effect AFSD is having in society. Story 13. Soil science adjacent researcher here. We are degrading, polluting, and losing our topsoil at such a rate that we may not be able to produce enough food to feed everyone within 50 to 60 years, let alone what impacts climate change may bring to bear on our food supply. And the US government's crop insurance programs and incentives all reinforce the bad practices, while discouraging regenerative practices. These bad policies are extremely hard to change because of lobbying from the major agribusiness companies who make money off of these short-sighted policies. Our food supply is further threatened by our agricultural overdependence on aquifer water, which is not being replenished, making it an unsustainable source of water. If the aquifers are overdrawn, depleted, or polluted, we hit a hard wall of water scarcity, and we will have no backups to address the problem with. The drawdown of the aquifers also causes land subsidence, which causes costly infrastructure and building damage. The general public does not realize the impending crisis that will be caused by the confluence of these factors. Story 14. Smallpox is really easy to bring back, and it'll kill 1/5 of the planet when it happens. Take some genocidal anger, knowledge tens of thousands have, and about $100,000. Here are all the ways it could happen. Number 1. US or Russian stocks leaked or used as a bioweapon. We keep some intentionally, it's very secure. This is unlikely in my humble opinion. Number 2. Accidentally bumped into an old lab and leaked during cleaning or something. Forgotten stocks are still occasionally found. Leak spreading is very unlikely in my humble opinion. Number 3. Intentional release via recreation. Someone resynthesizes it from scratch via public sequence according to this paper, with about 100,000 in materials. Methods plus difficulty identical to what is published here. It's totally possible and almost simple to do. Smallpox powder dropped in envelopes mailed around the world by a disgruntled underpaid PhD student. See Aurora, Colorado shooter. An outbreak is out of hand before it's noticed, and billions die. Story 15. There's a solar event known as CME, or a coronal mass ejection. It occurs very frequently on a cosmic timescale. Every few decades to centuries, there's a decent-sized one. Why are they scary? A CME is a massive burst of radiation, easily able to fully envelop the Earth in its path, and it's equivalent of a non-stop EMP barrage. The last time a big one hit the Earth was when we had telegraph lines for communications and they spontaneously caught fire. In today's world, with everything running on electricity, when the next big one hits, we'll have at most a few days warning. And it'd be a literal apocalypse movie scenario, with planes going down due to their whole electrical system frying, nobody's vehicle starting, untold billions in fire damage would wreak havoc everywhere, and the machines we depend on to help would be similarly fried. Some stuff would be unaffected, being parked in deep, concrete-roofed parking garages and the like, but our entire infrastructure would be useless for years. It'd literally send us into a mini dark age while people tried to get things working again. Recovery would take decades to centuries. Story 16. Haven't seen this one yet. Insects are going extinct. We have lost a significant chunk just since the 80s. I think it was around 20%. Mosies are going up because of course, but just about everything else is going. Wasn't until I read this that I realized that as a kid in the 90s, I used to see butterflies all the time, dragonflies. My house used to get invaded by Christmas beetles every year. Not so much. These days I might see only 1 or 2 Christmas beetles in December, if any at all. When I was a kid, I remember finding 8 in my house in a single night. Same house. Story 17. Here are a few scary medical science facts regarding CPR that you won't often hear in your first aid or CPR class put on in school. I only learned this stuff after schooling to become an EMT. What's the success rate of CPR? The average person assumes 75% or greater. In reality, it's barely 10%. It's one of the first things they told us in training because all new people have way too high of an expectation of the effectiveness of CPR. It can be very depressing when you're doing everything you were trained for and aren't getting the results you think you should be getting. The time from collapse to the administration of a shock via AED is absolutely paramount. They say the chances of survival drop 10% per minute. Oh, and rescue breaths. If you're not being very, and I mean very careful, you'll cause gastric dissension. You'll literally be blowing up their stomach, and they will vomit. And there are the cracks and crackles. If done right, it'll sound and feel like you're breaking every rib in little old lady Nelson's chest. You're likely not. It's cartilage and other bits shifting. Although, if you're a bit too vigorous, you may very well break a rib or two. But hey, they're already dead, so it doesn't matter. They'd rather be alive with a broken rib than dead. Story 18. Application security engineer here. I know that cybersecurity is not the science most people were probably hoping for, but I have some fun facts about your data. For starters, Facebook builds shadow profiles of people, so even if you don't have a Facebook, you do. Facebook collects your data from many sites you visit. If you see a like or share button on Facebook, they're collecting the data and adding it to the shadow profile. They basically stalk you, from seeing how long you're on a web page to what you click. This is usually used for advertising purposes, but was also used for nefarious purposes, as seen with Cambridge Analytica. Secondly, in many countries, namely the USA, your data is for sale. From voter records to your address and the people you live with. Each US state has its own laws about selling voter data, but for example, North Carolina allows you to download all the voter data for free. The voter data included are full name, address, voter ID, phone number, race or ethnicity, gender, where you were born, when you were born, county, age, driver's license number, and more. We wanted to see how accurate this could be, and used Florida voter data to check my stepfather's information. It gave us his current address, voter ID, full name, phone number, and what party he voted for in 2020. It was also all accurate. Third, with breaches like the one we saw with Facebook, people can cross-reference your information and find you easily. If you think about it, this could lead to extreme terrorism from people who don't agree with you politically, which is pretty scary. Finally, if you toss in a website like White Pages, they can cross-reference this information to find friends, family, previous numbers, addresses, and sometimes emails of you and your loved ones. And all this information is protected only by a paywall. If they really want to get into the open source intelligence of this, they can look for breaches on your email or number in database dumps on sites like thehash.com and could even potentially take over your accounts. Some breaches might even include hacked voter data, which straight up leaks your social security number. Story 19. The Doomsday Clock is a hypothetical clock in which 12 a.m. or midnight is meant to be the point at which our species is eradicated by way of war or natural means. Scientists operate the clock and change the time based in the current environment. During times of uncertainty, such as war or humanitarian crises, the time would be set closer to midnight. The supposedly calmest time in the past few decades was in 1991. We have been closest to midnight in these 4 instances. Number 1. 1949. Soviets' first nuclear test, 3 minutes. 2. 1953. US tests the hydrogen bomb, 2 minutes. 3. 1984. US-Soviet relations reaches their lowest point, and when our species was arguably closest to nuclear eradication, 3 minutes. And finally, for the past 3 years. We are not in a time of great conflict or war, yet we are closer today, according to scientists running the clock, than we have ever been to our own destruction as a species. The ongoing creation of nuclear weapons, the perpetual threat of cybersecurity, and of course, climate change and environmental destruction. We've been counting down from 3 minutes for the past 4 years. We are currently set closer than ever before, at just 100 seconds to midnight. Edit. The clock updates once a year. With everything going on now, we're probably even closer. Story 20. There's an amoeba called Naegleria fowleri that lives in shower water, tap water, ACs, springs, and lakes that can crawl into your sinus and travel upwards slowly until it carves its way into your brain, if you do not have a strong enough immune response. The water needs to be sprayed inside of the nose and be quite forceful, and it can't be from a small amount like mist or a droplet, because the amoeba is too heavy to travel that way, and one amoeba won't make it. If you get the infection, it's 99% fatal. There have been 2 survivors, one was a normal child, and the other is a now mentally deficient man in his 40s. Its closest cousin, Acanthamoeba, lives in construction dust, dirt, ground dust, sand, mud, your floor where you walk in, extremely shallow water, and is 100% fatal. It can also cause non-specific pink eye and eye infections that progress into the brain. Story 21. There was a massive solar storm in 2012 that missed the Earth by around 25 days. It was described as a Carrington-class event, and had it hit Earth head-on, it would have fried anything running on electricity and would have thrown us back to the Stone Age. In June 2013, a joint venture from researchers at Lloyd's of London in Atmospheric and Environmental Research, or AER in the United States, used data from the Carrington event to estimate the cost of a similar event in the present to the US alone at $0.6 to $2.6 trillion, which at the time equated to roughly 3.6% to 15.5% of annual GDP. According to NASA, analysts believe that a direct hit by an extreme CME, such as the one that missed Earth in July 2012, could cause widespread power blackouts, disabling everything that plugs into a wall socket. Most people wouldn't even be able to flush their toilets because urban water supplies largely rely on electric pumps. The reason why we know so much about it was because the storm hit the Stereo A Solar Observatory, which survived because it was specifically designed to survive a solar storm. So, unless your electrical supply is as well protected as a literal solar satellite, you're shit out of luck. The upshot is that you'd be able to see the aurora pretty much wherever you are in the world. So there's that.